Hello, everyone. My name is Blair Busenbark with Mycorrhizal Applications. We're excited to sponsor this episode of Greenhouse Growers Grower to Grower podcast. We provide the green industry with biorational products like biofungicides, PGRs, biopesticides, and of course, mycorrhizal fungi. Mycorrhizal fungi are fascinating organisms that colonize plant roots, allowing plants to be more efficient with their nutrient and water uptake, finish quicker, and have higher stress tolerance. Learn more at mycorrhizae.com.
Welcome to Greenhouse Grower to Grower, the podcast where we talk to growers from across the greenhouse industry about market trends, innovation, their biggest challenges and opportunities, and more. I'm Brian Sparks, editor of Greenhouse Grower. In this episode, we continue our closer look at growers speaking at Cultivate 24. We also return to Costa Farms for this week's episode. I'm joined by Michelle Opela, Senior IPM Manager at Costa Farms, who will be giving two talks at Cultivate, one on the foundations of IPM and interior-scaping, and the other on practical insights and troubleshooting when using biocontrols in the greenhouse. Michelle's career path started with studying biology at Cornell University. After a brief stint in marine biology, she joined Costa's R&D team 8 years ago, eventually finding her way into managing the company's IPM program. In this episode, I talk with Michelle about keeping up with new advancements in biocontrols, how her marine biology experience convinced her to follow her passion for plants, and why integrated pest management is all about learning from your past mistakes. Here's our conversation.
I wasn't always in horticulture. I actually started way back in the day in marine science.
Okay.
I got my bachelor's in biology with a concentration in marine science. I always thought I was going to play with dolphins. But I did some stunts in marine biology. I got attacked by seabirds, stung by jellyfish. I actually won an award for being the most seasick person on the boat. And then I quickly decided that maybe this isn't the right field for me. So then after that whole adventure, I started looking at, different careers, like a stable career.
Yeah.
And when I was at Cornell, I always, I worked at the Guterman Research Lab. So it was a research greenhouse. And I actually loved getting up and going to work in that greenhouse.
Nice.
For a college student, that probably says a lot. And, when I got back home from my marine biology adventures, and I decided I needed a new career path. So I decided horticulture was probably the best fit for me. And at this time, it was winter in New York. So of course, I started looking in Florida.
Sure.
And I found this job in research and development at Costa Farms. And because of my research background, in college, it was very attractive to me. So I applied, went through a few interviews, got in, and then I started my career 10 years ago at Costa Farms in the R&D trial garden manager position.
Okay.
So it was a bit of a culture shock going from New York to Miami. It was much hotter, much more humid. And, I was working outside with the plants, working with the breeders a lot. I got to basically just grow a very pretty garden for a few years. It exposed me a lot to the industry as a whole. And I'm very grateful for my time in R&D because, we're working with plant breeders, but we're also working across other facets of the industry as well. So it was a great experience. But after 2 years, I was ready for something different. And we had a department at Costa called TGS, stands for Total Growth Solutions. And that department sold liners and plugs to other greenhouses in the United States. And my supervisor, Cindy, needed some help. So I joined that team as the technical support manager.
Okay.
Basically what that meant was it kind of put me in more of a role, less research, more hands-on production. So I got to work with our growers and young plants, growing the crops, and also our customers, our other greenhouses across the US. And if they had issues with the crops or something was happening, I was up and I got to figure out what was going on, what was the problem, how can we fix it in the future, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
So that was good because it got me a little bit more ingrained in the actual growing aspect of horticulture. So I did that. And I loved it. I got to travel with Cindy for a while, got to see a lot of other greenhouses. I did that for a few years. And then after that, Costa actually decided to kind of centerline more of what we were doing as a company. And TGS, unfortunately, was disbanded.
Okay.
Costa decided to go in a different direction. And at that time, I didn't really have a job in the future. And so Costa worked with me, and they actually found a position in North Carolina. It was for an IPM manager.
Okay.
And at the time, I didn't know what that was. And after I did some research, just a quick Google search, I realized that that was working with the bugs and the plants. And for me, it was a no-brainer.
Yeah.
I love bugs. I always have. And I took that position. The gentleman who was doing that was retiring in a month. So he gave me a quick lowdown, and then I was off and running in my position.
Nice.
And I've
Nice.
been doing this now for about maybe 4 years. I think it's been 4 years. Time just flies. Maybe
Oh yeah.
5. I don't know. But it's been a while.
Well, it's great, and you can tell that Costa saw the value that you brought to the company, because you don't see that very often. Where if a division shuts down, in some cases, whoever works in that brand or that division is no longer has a job. But the fact that they were able to work with you to identify something that helped address a need for them and a need for you, that's
Mhm.
great. And
Yeah.
and I tell you too, just going back to the beginning of the conversation there, I love not just how you grew into the role of Costa, but also learning early on what wasn't the best fit for you. I know I was talking to a few folks earlier this week for another story that we're doing that's kind of talking about what's happening with enrollment in horticulture programs at the university level. And one
Mm-hmm.
of the things that a couple people were talking about was, colleges will help set up internships and have students talk to, business owners in the industry. But it's not just about, hiring them and finding their role. It's also about making sure that that person has the real expectations of what it takes to be part of this industry, and to decide if it's right for them. Because as you
Yeah.
said, you want to learn that early, as opposed to get somebody way in the process and then they decide a couple of years in, this isn't right for me. And then they have to start over again, and you have to start over again. So
Yeah, absolutely. And I've seen that unfortunately happen before.
yeah.
You get these images in your head of horticulture, and you just get to be in nice, pristine clothes and not sweating and looking at these flowers. And like, if you're in the field, if you choose a career path in horticulture where you're working with the plants, it's a totally different scenario.
Yeah.
It for some people like me, it's a perfect fit, having that ability to be out in the field, but also in the office. I couldn't imagine life any other way, but
Mhm.
it definitely isn't for everybody.
So, I'm curious, with you're in a relatively new position, and without having the long background experience in IPM, what do you do in terms of keeping up with, it's still a
Mhm.
rapidly emerging part of the industry, latest
100%.
innovations, latest advancements. What do you do to keep up with that?
And you really nailed it on the head. It is a rapidly growing, fairly new area of horticulture.
Hmm.
And we think we know, but it seems like every year the things that we thought that we knew change.
Yeah.
And so it's definitely one of the more, I think it's challenging to keep up with. In the beginning, what I would do is I would just ask everyone. I'm very lucky at Costa to have a huge plethora of resources available, both
Hmm.
internally and externally. So I really leverage those in the beginning. I also always try to attend Cultivate and events like that. That's where you're going to see a lot of these companies launching these new products and
Hmm.
giving in-depth information about these new products. And so those those is where I get the majority of my information. But I
Okay.
want to also highlight our internal team because cost is huge and there's a lot of knowledge at this company. I bet if I did the math, it would be somewhere between 1,000 or a couple 100,000 years of experience collectively.
Hmm.
So, internally, sharing information and learning from each other has been huge.
Yeah.
Um, and early on, I really didn't know biocontrol. And I'm very grateful for the biological companies and some of the consultants that we worked with to really guide me and teach me a lot of these things.
Yeah.
Because there is a lot of misinformation out there, especially on this topic.
Hmm.
And it is so important to make sure you're getting your information from legitimate sources.
Yeah.
Because even though the information changes, it may be correct one year and then the next year it changes, there's also information out there that's just wrong. And
Mm,
so making sure you're getting your information from good sources is so important.
yeah. So you've got these programs set in place now. So I would imagine one of the, I don't want to say challenge, but it's an issue, would be communicating the benefits of biocontrols and what it entails to some of Costa's customers, whether it's
Yeah.
the retail buyer or the end consumer for that matter. I know Costa does a lot of direct to consumer education. How does
Mhm.
that process work, and do you play a role in any of that?
I do. It's very exciting. I'm really happy we're talking about this. This is something I think, the addition, we've had a few changes in the past few years with our marketing department and the directions that we've been going, but
Mm,
I'm very, very happy with the direction of the marketing department and, our communication with end consumers as well as customers right now.
yeah.
Mari, who I think you talked to a few weeks ago, she and I had the opportunity to meet, and she is very passionate about this topic.
Mm,
And they do actually bring me in quite a bit to help with some projects, initiatives, educational material, et cetera, things like that. And I'm
mm,
very excited because, we're working on a lot of things behind the background. That's all I can say. But
yeah.
I think that there's going to be a lot more of Costa really stepping into that role in communicating with end consumers. What is biocontrol? Like, what does it look like? Why are we using it? Et cetera, et cetera. We've started to kind of scratch the surface of that.
Yeah.
But I think we're definitely trying a little bit more in upcoming years. It is one of those topics that, historically we've been a little trepidatious about
Hmm.
because you don't know how the end consumer is going to respond to bugs on plants.
Right. Yeah.
There's this mentality out there that the only good bug is a dead bug, and a lot of end consumers buy into that.
Yeah.
And so, it's always been I think we've been very smart in being cautious about how we address this with the end consumer.
Mm,
Um, and then in terms of our actual customers, like Lowe's, Home Depot, Walmart, things like that,
yeah.
they are also very interested in this, biological approach. It is a fine line, and it is definitely challenging, because with biologicals, your your thresholds are pretty unforgiving.
Hmm.
So what I mean to say is, as a commercial producer for ornamental plants, our plants need to be pristine and immaculate.
Right.
And, you know, with a biological program, sometimes you're not going to have 100% immaculate plants. So a great example of this is aphids. This is a challenge that we've had a few years.
Mm,
There are aphid parasitoids out there, and we use them heavily in North Carolina. And so we have a population of aphids we may not even know because we didn't catch it on the plants.
sure.
And we have parasitoids coming in as part of our program and, parasitizing these, and they turn into mummies, which are big, brown balloons on these plants. And we see it as a good thing. But, when it goes to the stores, they may not want to see that. And
Yeah.
it's always been kind of this dance of, having some on there, but not too much, and then explaining what they are. Working with the Lowe's sales team, I've had the opportunity to talk to a few of the teams at Lowe's and kind of go over, what are these things? What do they mean? What are we
Sure.
doing? And really kind of just educating across the board. So but it is a fine dance, right? So I think that there's more to come, and I'm very excited about it. But I think, our strategy has to be very good. And I think that the team is doing a very good job of making sure everything is in place and communicated correctly.
Yeah. So when you look across the industry then, and I know some of our surveys that we do have kind of bared some of this out, certainly the use of biologicals is increasing in this industry and continues to increase. But, there are still some who haven't gone down this road yet.
Mhm.
What advice do you have for them? I mean, what would it take to get them to take this next step and really see the benefits of what a biological program can bring to their business?
Well, come to my talk. Uh, I get this question a lot, and it honestly does change sometimes, how I respond, because as always, things are constantly in flux. But there have been three things that I've pretty much consistently stuck with that I think would be valuable for someone coming into biocontrol.
Mm-hmm.
First and foremost, if you have a pyramid, the base of that pyramid, your base of your program, scouting, making sure that you have a scouting team in place, processes for scouting, and that your team is well trained in both identifying the insects as well as the biologicals. This is so important for so many reasons. Reason number one, obviously, is if you're doing a bio program, you want to know how it's doing. You need to know how it's doing in real time.
Sure.
So you're not going to get that information by looking at, just going out and standing and looking at the crop. These are microorganisms, like macro, but micro. They're very small organisms. You need a team to go in there and search for these pests and search for these bios to know if it's working. So obviously, you want to have them well trained before you start implementing this, just to know, is it working? Is it going off the rails? Do I need to adjust a little bit here? Maybe I can scale back a little bit there. So that is obviously very important when it comes to scouting. But another thing people don't think about is I think a lot of people go into bio programs just like both feet first. They just jump right in. And I would be very cautious to do that.
Sure.
First of all, because a lot can go wrong. These are living organisms, and you're playing around with a lot of money. Second of all, do you even need to do that? Like, do you need to buy things for whitefly if you don't have whitefly at a certain time of year? So I think, something we don't talk about a lot with the bio program and scouting is getting scouting going before you implement a program, and while you're implementing it, to know, when do I need to release things and for what? Do I have bemesial whitefly? Do I have greenhouse whitefly? Really getting granular with that is going to help you save money. It's going to help your program be more successful. You can't take a big blanket approach and just throw the kitchen sink at it. But I think you're going to get very frustrated. You're going to spend more money than you need to. And you may not even see it work because you may be targeting the wrong species.
Right.
So scouting is very, very important. They are the foundation of the program.
Okay.
And then when you do get scouting and when you start introducing biologicals, a lot of what I've seen and heard, unfortunately, is unless you're at a brand new greenhouse, right? You're a brand new greenhouse, you're just starting, odds are there's some chemical residue in your facility somewhere. And taking a very hard look at what you were spraying for the last 1 year at the bare minimum, and really looking at those chemicals and then comparing it to some compatibility guides. When I first started, those compatibility guides online for biologicals and chemicals were my Bible. I refer to them so much because it's complex. You would think that fungicides are safe, but maybe it's not, and you would think that a fertilizer would be fine, but if you're talking about nematodes, it's not fine.
Right.
So there's a lot of nuances, and understanding your past chemical applications and understanding what impact those have and any future applications, what impacts they have, is very important. So there's a few online. The bio companies have been really, really good about doing these compatibility guides for their products.
Sure.
Two that come to mind are Coper. BioBest is another good one. I think BioLine has one as well. But you could just do a Google search. They make it available to everybody. So getting really familiar with those. And, if you are doing your due diligence and your program still isn't working and you're using the right beneficial for the right problem, you may want to look at doing residue testing on your plants.
Okay.
And even though you haven't sprayed it, it could still be there. I've heard of this one greenhouse somewhere where, they were trying to get this program going and they were struggling. So they sent out tissue for residue testing, and they found all of these very incompatible chemicals on their plants. And they were like, where is this coming from? They were pulling their hair out because they hadn't applied it. They didn't even have the chemical on the property anymore. But what happens is it's not always what you're spraying. It could be in your environment. So in the case of this greenhouse, it was actually in their fans.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And it's not a lot, right? Insects don't need, if it's a one of those very incompatible chemicals. It doesn't take a lot to throw a program off. And it was blowing, it was doing its job. It was the fan in the greenhouse, but it was constantly inoculating these plants with this pesticide. And they had to do swabs and figure all this stuff out. So again, chemicals can have long-lasting effects depending on which ones you're using. With that being said, I am not anti-chemical. You're going to have to use chemicals, especially when you're getting your program going.
Sure.
But making sure that you're using chemicals that are compatible is very important as you kind of wean your production to a more biological program.
Right.
Wait, that was two. I had another one. What was my other? I'm sorry. Were you going to say something? Because I had one more.
No, please go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay. And then my last one, what was it? Oh, it's escaping me right now. You know what? Never mind. Oh, yes, I remember what it was. It was, I'm sorry, but it was to start small.
Okay.
And I kind of prefaced this in one of the other recommendations, but a lot of people do tend to go in full throttle, and that could be a very bad idea. I like to recommend to people starting with biological control that they start with kind of the quote unquote what I call gateway bios. And those are biologicals that are just a little bit more resilient to any chemical residues that you can kind of imagine are probably in the area. So things like nematodes, Delosia aethida, those are great areas to start and really get into depth on these and master these, biologicals, and master this piece of the program before expanding, because there's a lot of nuances that go into each one of these bios, and mastering each one before just going all in is just a more sustainable and probably going to be more successful way of starting a program.
Sure. What about getting buy-in from your team? And so I'm thinking, if you're like a head grower who, on the one hand, you've got a team of section growers underneath you who I'm sure have to stay very diligent. And on the other side, you've got the team above you that need to make sure that they're all in this commitment. How do you work through that process?
Yeah. So okay, let me preface this by saying that I'm very lucky. Costa Farms, when I moved into this position, the goal was the bio program. Build it, make it happen. And so upper management was very on board. And most of the growers were on board. I did kind of take some control away from them in the beginning, which I think, would make anybody kind of reluctant. So I took over all of the fungicides, all of the insecticides, because again, I wanted to make sure that everything was compatible with the biologicals. And so there was definitely a little bit of apprehension in the beginning from, my coworkers. But, after doing this, and I think it's very important that if you do, you make it very clear that, yes, I am responsible. I'm taking full responsibility for this program. If there's a pest on your plant, it is on me. I've got this. Like, if you see something, please tell me. But really taking full responsibility for that program is important, because I think that if you lead by example and go in, kind of somewhat fearless, even though you may be a little bit trepidatious beneath the surface. I think going in with that kind of strong leadership is going to be very important in getting buy-in from the team. And then you're not going to be successful all the time. You're going to have failures, but owning those failures is going to help. As much as it may seem counterintuitive, I do think it helps build your reputation and build your connection in your relationships with the team. Working with them at all times, keeping them in the loop is so important, because the way cost is structured, I do manage the fungicides, insecticides. Now my team does, but it is important for the growers to know that you're not ignoring this, that you are aware and that you are on top of it. Because, at the end of the day, those are their plants that they're growing, and you're all working together. So communication, letting them know that you're in it, you're responsible, you've got this, and letting them know what's going on in their area. Hey, we saw aphids in your area. This is what we're doing. Just a heads up. And then, once the program did start to kind of take off, the growers had less work to do. And I don't mean like less work. They still have a lot of work. But I mean, in terms of spraying all the time, there was less of that. And I don't know many people who love spraying.
Right.
And so that was, one opportunity to say, hey, I did this little analysis and I see that we spent X hours less in spraying. Isn't that cool? Kind of being your own best advocate for how you're helping them is a great way to kind of bridge any reluctance that there may be.
Oh, sure.
And then, if you are in a position where upper management, I have thought about this. If upper management is not on board, I think, trying a small program, and I've seen this happen with a few other growers, trying a program in your area and keeping it small, and then doing an analysis on how much money did I save in labor? How much money did I save in dumps? What is this looking like in the future? Really doing a harder analysis, like a quantifiable analysis with dollar amounts, is going to speak volumes to any
Yeah.
executive committee or anyone in that area that isn't on board. Because at the end of the day, it can be a little expensive to get going, but it does kind of pay for itself. I can tell you from experience, it does get cheaper, and it does get easier. And really taking that and making it a dollar amount is going to help sell any executives who aren't on board.
Sure. So you mentioned a few minutes ago, you briefly referenced your talk at Cultivate. So let's talk about that. What are the main areas that you want to hit, and then what can attendees expect to learn when they come and listen?
So I'm actually talking twice at Cultivate, which I'm very excited about. It's my kind of debut into talking, and I'm at Cultivate at least, and I'm very, very excited for the opportunity.
Yeah.
So my first presentation is at the interior scape presentation. So it's the foundations of IPM, identifying and treating interior plantscape pests. That is the first one, and that is going to be focused on interior scapes and obviously pest management inside an interior scape setting. And the first part of this presentation is going to basically just focus on pests. What are they? How do you identify them? A little anecdotal, a nod to identifying biologicals as well, but I'm going to be focusing mostly on pests.
Okay.
And in some of those areas, I will be taking a little bit of a deeper dive into some of the pests to go into the nuances of their reproduction, some of the behaviors that they have, as well as some other kind of biological nuances that you may be able to exploit in your pest management practices.
Right.
So, we're going to take a bit of a deep dive. We're going to look at it from the 10,000 foot view and then get kind of into each profile of each pest.
Okay.
After that, we're going to go into management practices. Interior scapes are very, they're very limited on, what they can do in terms of comparing those to a greenhouse, right? Because you can't really apply pesticides inside in this setting. And so that whole pest management process is going to look different, and it's going to come with its own set of challenges. So talking about those and some potential solutions for those is going to be the second half of that presentation.
Okay.
So that's presentation number one. The second one I'm very, very, very excited about is called Mastering Biocontrol, Practical Insights in Troubleshooting and Greenhouse Pest Management. That one, and to put it in a nutshell, I'm basically going to be talking about all the ways that my bio program failed. And I'm oddly excited about this because, it is a very nuanced topic,
right.
And it is tricky. And I wish that I had someone tell me these things before I did this. And so I'm going to spend a lot of time in this presentation. I will be taking it like a 10,000 foot view on some questions, like how do you calculate how many biologicals to put out? How do you, QC testing? How do you know if it's working? Things like that. So I'll take a bit of a 10,000 foot view there,
Sure.
but then I'm going to jump into a lot of examples of times that the bio program has not worked for us in really detailed scenarios of what happened, what went wrong. And so in the future, if you are trying to do this program or something similar, you can look at this sample or this example scenario and say, okay, in that sample, the bios were dead, or in that sample, they weren't put out correctly and the spacing wasn't correct. And so we had hotspots and the thing exploded, things like that. And so I'm really going to be highlighting a lot of our learning experiences. And my hope is that people coming to this are going to at least get one thing out of it.
Right.
And hopefully that helps them when they're developing their programs, not to have a large scale failure. You're going to fail. It's part of life. But I'm really hoping to help people bypass some of these things that I learned the hard way.
Well, and that's honestly one of the best ways to learn. You don't, learn by succeeding. You learn by looking at the failures and seeing, okay, what did we do wrong? What can we then change to make things better the next time? So that's a very refreshing approach to take, I think. And I think it's, something that those who are in the room are certainly going to get a lot out of.
I hope so. I certainly hope so. But if nothing else, it was approved for recertification credits. So
Nice.
if nothing else, just come to it and you can get some research credits.
Sure. Well, as we start to wind down here, one of the things I want to do is look ahead. As your role at Costa continues to evolve and the industry continues to evolve, what excites you most about this segment of the industry that you're in? Where do you see things headed that you're most excited about?
So, as a whole, horticulture, there's a lot of things happening. But in my little niche industry where I'm focusing in my program in biologicals, there's so much happening, Brian. There's so much. So, from an application, from a person who is executing this, my struggles, what do they look like? What's going to help me a lot, and people in my position a lot. Number one for me is technology, which I know is a blanket statement, but when I say technology, I mean technology for putting out biologicals, because I think one of the biggest inhibiting factors for why large companies aren't able to use biologicals as effectively is because they're really hard to put out at scale.
Sure.
And having equipment and technology to get these things out faster is important. These are living organisms. You can't store them. So when they arrive, you have to get them out and you have to get them out fast.
Right.
So I've seen a few things coming down the pipeline of, biological companies and other companies as well coming out with solutions for this to put out biologicals at a large scale quickly, because we're all about efficiency. We're all about quality, getting the right coverage and doing it well and doing it fast. And so I think that's going to be really groundbreaking for this whole area, because I think a lot more people are going to be able to enter the game if they can put them out faster and more efficiently. So that's one I'm really excited about.
Okay.
Another one is it's kind of a pipe dream. It's a ways away, but I think it's going to happen one day. And that is AI for scouting.
Okay.
And there's a couple of companies out there that are, enterprising companies, and they're working on this already.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of challenges, Brian, because you can have a camera pick up on like bacteria, certain fungal pathogens, et cetera, because some of those are on the tops of the leaf surface. And so the technology is getting there with some of these issues and some of these pests. But when it comes to the insects and arthropods and mites, they're mostly on the undersides of the leaves. And so there's a huge challenge right there for, this technology and this equipment, these cameras to pick up on these things that are hidden under a leaf. So I think, it's going to happen. The fact that the fungi, bacteria are already in the pipeline, I think it's only a matter of time. And I think that's going to be revolutionary as well. First, picking up on things earlier, and then, kind of coming up with more algorithms to basically make your program automated would be just crazy. Because in my position at any given day, we're all making loads of decisions. And so if we can get this program and this AI going, picking up on these pests, and we can start to set algorithms and automate a lot more of this, I think it's going to be huge. And I think we're going to see things get a lot more efficient. And then last but not least, it's kind of a fun one. I'm just excited for it because it's fun and, for me personally, exciting, but not necessarily revolutionary for the industry. Maybe, maybe not. But I'm really excited to see some new biologicals hit the market. It's been a long time since we've had a new biological introduced, commercially in the United States.
Yeah.
And there's a few that are in the pipeline, and there's quite a few that are already available in Europe, but not across the pond over here in the US. There's one I'm really excited. It's a predatory thrips. It's Vesperformis thrips. I don't know the name so well because we don't have it yet. But Vesperformis is, I think, how you say it. But that's cool to me just because it's a thrips. Imagine being able to talk to people and say, oh yeah, we're using predatory thrips. It's just like, you don't. And I mean, it does a very good job. I've seen it here in the United States. It exists here. It's just proving that and getting it and I don't even know, all the rigmarole behind the scenes, all the legal stuff. I can't imagine how many hoops you have to jump through, but it would be really cool to have a predatory thrips here. And it's here already. It's obviously doing well to be here and surviving. So that's what I'm very excited about. Syrphid flies, hoverflies hold a special place in my heart. I know Europe has them. I see them everywhere. We utilize banker plants to draw them in. But those are great beneficials because they're mobile, like the thrips, but the syrphid flies are very good flyers. And so what I like about that is you can put them out and they'll find the pest for you. You can be a little more lax about where exactly they go. And I love that about, those biologicals that you can count on to find the pest for you. And then I have one more. So the last one I've heard about are brown lacewings. And I've seen them here. Well, I personally haven't seen them here. Everyone else has told me they've seen them here. It's on my bucket list to actually see a brown lacewing. But I know they're here. I just haven't visually seen them. That's another great one. We have green lacewings. They do a fantastic job, but the adults, sorry, lacewings, the adults are not very useful. They're nectar feeders. Whereas with brown lacewings, all stages of this biological are predators, the adults and the larvae. And so getting something like that here would be very exciting for me too. So please bring us new biologicals.
Well, I really think that, the work that you're doing, and the work that the whole Costa team is doing is something that, our audience can really learn a lot from. So, I appreciate you having the conversation with me today. I encourage folks who are coming to Cultivate to attend both of these sessions, because as you just heard, there's a lot to learn, and there's a lot that we are going to continue to have to learn about where we're headed in this sector. So really appreciate your insights here.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you so much for having me on. And I guess I'll see you at Cultivate.
Yeah, for sure.
Thanks for joining us. You can learn more at greenhousegrower.com. Please subscribe to this podcast wherever you listen, and please leave us a rating as it helps other podcast listeners find the show.